Hello and welcome, my name is Disaster, this is Battlefield 1, and in today's weapon review, we're going to be taking a closer look at the Model 1900 shotgun, available of course to the Assault class in the In the Name of the Tsar DLC. We're of course, as per usual, going to be looking at the unlock requirements of this shotgun, the stats, how it performs on the battlefield, how the different variants of this shotgun compare to both each other and of course the other available shotguns to the Assault class in Battlefield 1, and last but certainly not least, we're also of course going to be looking at how to use this shotgun most effectively on the battlefield. Starting off then with the unlock requirements. To unlock the factory variant of the Model 1900, you're going to have to get 40 kills with the M97 trench gun backboard, as well as within one round 5 kills with the AT rocket gun. If you wish to unlock the Slug variant of the Model 1900, you're going to have to get 50 kills with the 12G automatic extended, as well as 20 kills with the Gaza M1870, this of course being a revolver. With the weapon then unlocked, let's move on to the actual stats, and as baseline for today's video, we're going to be looking at the Model 1900 factory variant. It comes with a maximum damage of 8.4 and a minimum damage of 4.2, that of course on a per pellet basis, and results in a one-shot kill range all the way out to 14 meters, comparable, actually pretty much identical to that of the Model 10A factory. Unlike, for example, however, the Model 10A, the Model 1900 comes with an extremely high fire rate at 299 rounds per minute. To somewhat compensate for these amazing qualities as shotguns come, it's got an extremely small number of shots available to it before you actually have to reload. This doesn't really, strictly seen, actually have a magazine. It's a double barrel shotgun and has as such 2 shots available to it before you actually have to reload the weapon. As per usual for shotguns, it has a very low muzzle velocity at 330 rounds per minute. However, untypical you may find for shotguns, especially with this kind of possible damage output and this kind of fire rate, it actually has a very high number of pellets per shot at 20 pellets per fired shot. The only shotgun in this department able to keep up with it being the Model 10A, which also comes in at 20 pellets per shot. Now when it comes to reload times on shotguns, usually it's quite simple. The more shots you have to reload, the more shells you have to reinsert into your shotgun, well, the longer your reload time is going to be. However, the Model 1900 is actually an exception to this rule, in that if you reload both shots instead of just one, you're actually going to be reloading quicker. In that case, so with all shots fired and none left, you're going to be reloading within 2.4 seconds. If you're only reloading one of your 2 available shots, you have 1 shot left to fire, you're actually going to need 3.2 seconds to reload your gun. In the recoil department of things, for the Model 1900, things aren't quite as interesting or unusual as they maybe are in the other stat departments. That is to say, with a vertical recoil of 8 and horizontal recoil, that is to the left and right, of 2, things are quite average and where you would expect them to be. The same can be said for the spread attributes of the Model 1900, with a base ADS obviously of 0 because you have of course random dispersion of the individual pellets instead of actual spread. However, additionally to that dispersion, you do have spread when aiming down sight and moving, in this case here at 0.4, and when hip firing this weapon standing and moving simultaneously, you're going to be dealing with spread at 0.6. Now with the base stats out of the way, in this case the Model 1900 factory, let's take a look at the differences between it and the other available versions of the Model 1900, specifically the Model 1900 Slug. And now of course the first and most obvious difference is going to come here in the damage department, because the Model 1900 Slug is a slug shotgun. In other words, it fires 1 projectile, 1 pellet per shot, and that individual projectile of course does a lot more damage than the individual ones of the Model 1900 factory's version. As such, the Model 1900 Slug comes in at a maximum damage of 112 and a minimum damage of 45, giving it a one-shot kill all the way out to 11 meters versus the 14 available on the factory version, a 2-shot kill between 12 and 55 meters, and from 56 meters onwards, you're actually going to have to hit your target in the chest 3 times if you wish to down them. If of course you get a headshot, things are going to be a lot quicker. Other than the to be expected differences in damage output of a slug versus factory version of a shotgun, there are a couple of other key differences that, well, are typical for factory versus slug shotgun conversions or comparisons, nevertheless, that I need to point out for today's video. One of them, of course, being the difference in muzzle velocity, whereas the factory version of the Model 1900 comes in at a muzzle velocity of 333 meters per second, the slug gets a slight bump to 420 meters per second to help it in its performance at those key medium range engagements. Furthermore, the slug variant of the shotgun comes with different spread attributes, whereas of course the usual factory, hunter, older extended versions of shotguns fire multiple pellets and as such deal with both spread and horizontal distribution, as well as random distribution of individual pellets on each and every shot. These Slug shotguns really operate much more like you would expect an SLR to operate, in that they've got a base ADS value, a base spread coefficient. However, they don't have additional spread attributes beyond those that you actually see on an SLR, and as such they have basically base ADS values as well as of course spread increase per shot values typical of something like an SLR. In the case of the 1900 Slug then, it comes in with a base ADS of 0.24 versus the 0 found on the factory version, an ADS while moving of 0.48 versus the 0.4 found on the factory version, and a hipfire coefficient or hipfire accuracy while standing and moving at 1.2 versus the 0.6 of the factory variant. In other words, hip firing on the factory variant is likely going to be more accurate than on the Slug variant. Given however the way you usually use a Slug shotgun, hip firing it is going to be the exception rather than the norm. Having then pointed out the key differences between these two weapons, let's start to get into actually how these weapons perform on the battlefield and how you should be using them. The first thing I really do need to mention here is that actually the alternative fire mode that's available to you when using this shotgun isn't as good as you may initially think it is. What you believe what's happening initially, or what I believed at least, is that both of the shots are being fired simultaneously. What's actually happening, as this clip here is going to demonstrate, is basically your shotgun is firing both of its shots but consecutively, so one after the other, meaning that your per shot recoil kicks in, leading to one shot being placed, even in close quarter scenarios, significantly higher than your other shot. So while in limited scenarios, maybe with the factory variant of this shotgun, you will be able to extend your one shot kill range or your damage a little bit on a per shot basis. Given the extremely high fire rate of this weapon, in my opinion, it's best to always run this shotgun in its normal one shot firing fire mode and simply take 2 shots at a target. You'll likely place those shots far more accurately and hit far more pellets, doing far more damage. Especially this applies of course to the Slug variant, where accuracy is so important, and unlike the factory variant, you don't have 20 pellets of which at least a couple may actually hit, despite the second shot being placed so much higher. In the case of the Slug, you're probably simply gonna miss. At least in my experience, I never managed to get that basically extended one shot kill range, especially when using the Slug variant. Some of you may be thinking now, well, why don't you just pull down when firing the weapon? I've tried that, but while you do decrease the distance that your 2 shots are landing from each other in a vertical direction, in reality it's still not going to be enough at anything but extreme close quarters, where you're getting a one shot kill anyway, to actually make the difference so that you will actually get both shots into your target. So in short, stick to the normal firing mode, the other is just for show. When it comes to the factory version of this weapon, it's very comparable both in stats and playstyle to something like the Model 10A Factory or Hunter. The difference being here that actually you have more leeway when it comes to missing a shot, less leeway when it comes to engaging multiple targets. Because of the extremely high fire rate, if you miss your first shot on an individual target, you easily have enough time to place a second before usually they have enough time to actually react or engage you. And unless of course they were expecting you to engage them at that point in time. Whereas with the Model 10A, you don't necessarily have that time because of your very poor fire rate at 78 rounds per minute. However, if you're running around with the Model 1900 factory and you come around the corner and see 2 or 3 people, you're usually going to actually have to run away or switch to your sidearm to actually deal with all those targets, because you really do have a maximum of 2 targets that you can take out, assuming of course perfect accuracy, which isn't something that is always quite so easy to achieve when every one of your enemies in close quarters is going to be performing some kind of elaborate AD spam dancing. So there really is the trade-off between something like a Model 10A and a Model 1900, both in the factory or in the case of the Model 10A Hunter variant. What I like so much about the Model 1900 is if you can really focus on taking one target at a time, you don't overextend, you don't find yourself in situations where you're engaging too many targets at a time. Really, the 1900 is the more forgiving weapon. It's the easier weapon to use. You're going to be able to get yourself out of sticky situations more often. However, if you're one of those people with 100% perfect accuracy, then likely I'd stick to the Model 10A, simply because, well, you're going to be able to use that perfect accuracy to take out more targets at one time. That level of accuracy, on the other hand, is quite unusual. While the factory version is clearly better for close quarters, the Slug version is actually an attractive choice that, unlike usually with Slug shotguns, I was able to not only do well with, but actually enjoy using as well. And for me personally, this comes down to the fact that the Slug version of the Model 1900 comes with iron sights, whereas most of the other Slug shotguns in Battlefield 1 come with optical preset optics, which are of course absolutely horrible when you're trying to aim accurate shots. Now, when it comes to differentiating between which of these two you want to pick, there's relatively a clear choice to be made. The factory is the better version for close quarter. This because it's easier to aim in close quarters, or the aim restrictions are less severe. You have a cone of fire versus a single projectile that you actually need to hit to get quite significant damage on your enemy. Furthermore, the factory has a longer one-shot kill radius. However, the Slug, on the other hand, has much better medium range distance damage. And this is where the player that enjoys a more flexible weapon, a weapon that allows him to perform well at many engagement distances, is likely going to choose the Slug version over the factory version, whereas a player that is intending on going into close quarters will likely prefer the factory version only. Both of these weapons require a very proactive, non-reactive playstyle that I have talked about in so many videos already, so I won't go into too much detail here, comparable to something like the auto-loading 8.35, be that in factory or marksman variant. I'd argue that the Slug is even more extreme in that sense because it requires even more caution that you don't get into close quarters where you're facing a target that is aware of your positioning and is engaging in some form of fancy movement. Hitting your shot with a shotgun like this, with only 2 shots available, a Slug variant on somebody that's AD dancing, is going to be an extremely difficult task and not a reliable way of taking out targets. With that being said, I'd recommend both of these weapons depending on your playstyle, maybe just a factory or maybe just a Slug. They're not the easiest weapons out there to use, but they're certainly very rewarding and very powerful. I'd love to, however, hear your thoughts on these weapons, your experiences with the Model 1900, be that Slug or factory. Leave them down below in the comments or hit me up with them on Twitter. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, to give it a thumbs up. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.